and welcome to Arch Talk Presents, a program brought to you by EPCC's Architecture Society. My name is Sabrina King, President of Architecture Society, and today I will be interviewing Jordan Yamada, creator of Yamada Architecture and Design, located in New York City. I hope you enjoy. Hello, I'm Sabrina King. I'm the president of the Architecture Society. How are you doing today, Mr. Yamada?
Hi, I'm doing well. My name is Jordan Yamada. I'm an architect practicing in New York City and a former classmate of Professor Moreno. And I wanted to thank you and the architectural community at Paso for inviting me to join this interview and share a little bit about my personal and professional experience in becoming an architect.
That's really cool that you were friends with him. You guys went to school together here in El Paso?
University of Texas in Arlington. We were in undergraduate school together.
How neat. That's really
we were neighbors. We lived in the same apartment complex as well as being classmates in the studio.
Wow, that's so cool. I didn't know that. You didn't tell me that part. You didn't tell me that. That's really neat. Oh, how cool. So I guess my first question for you is going to be, and I know it's a routine probably question, but what pushed you to be an architect? And when did you start? I do remember you said you had a construction background. So how did it somewhat become the architecture part?
I think that has to do with a lot of my personal interests, and probably if I look back to my childhood, I was drawing a lot, and I loved drawing. So my art background influenced the decision, and it was never really, as a profession, it was never really something that entered my mind or that I thought of from an early age. As I noted, I was interested in art and also archaeology, and
that's really cool.
I sort of fell into a working environment or beginning to work at an early age, and I began working in construction when I was in high school, and I didn't conceive of it as being related to architecture. It was more serendipity.
Yeah.
I began learning to repair buildings primarily, and worked in the maintenance department at my high school. And when I got into college, I began working in their carpenter shop on campus. And that became a little environment that was very supportive of academic endeavors. What influenced me to become an architect? In high school, I was trying to decide upon a major, and a friend of mine who had graduated a couple years ahead of me chose electrical engineering. And I thought, well, that sounds interesting. Yeah. I'll be an electrical engineer since everybody's asking me my major and I don't know what I want to do.
That one. Yeah.
So I'll pick one. I'll pick a major. Mm-hmm. And I had, at the time, my mother's first cousin, who was also my godfather, was practicing civil engineer in Los Angeles. And when I graduated, Mom sent me out there to stay with my cousins for a month. And he was older. He had retired already from the city and was working as a sole practitioner, surveying buildings and laying out lot lines. Yeah. And I went with him and helped him survey buildings and do lot layouts as relates to civil engineering. And during that course, I met one of the architects that he was working with.
That's really cool.
Was not a famous architect. He was just a normal guy. Mm-hmm. And I thought, hey, this is something that would probably be a nice combination of the art background that I had, archaeology and building,
Yeah.
and I became very excited about that. Yeah. And so when I came back, I changed my major from electrical engineering to architecture.
It's pretty neat, though, the combination of all the things that we have to do.
Yeah, I would say for those who've already decided on the profession is to really look at the things that interest you and that you're passionate about. And you may not see a correlation between that and the profession of architecture, but it really is so broad and encompassing that you can begin to explore history, archaeology, cultural anthropology through architecture.
Yeah, there's so many different ways.
There's a wide array of options that the discipline of architecture helps to reinforce and nurture.
Yeah, it is. It's awesome how many aspects go into it, or like you can think about or include into your work. But so since you're talking about Arlington, after you graduated, did you go right away to New York? Did you get a job? Like, how did you end up in New York? It's a very big city. It's far away. You know, you're a Texas guy. So that was my personal curious question.
Yeah, that's a good question. I was born in California and moved to Texas, the Fort Worth area, when I was 10. My father had been diagnosed with terminal illness, and my mom wanted to be close to her family in the event he passed away. So Texas it was, because she was born in Texas. And I always appreciated the cultural diversity of California, and I missed that. And after I graduated, I soon became a dad, and I worked locally with different firms in Dallas. And as our son grew older and was nearing the age to enter school, I wanted to re-immerse myself and my family in a culturally diverse community. And at that time, that was in 2001, I guess. Well, my son was born in 2001.
Okay.
It had always been in the back of my mind. And I worked in Dallas until about 2005 for different firms. I got my chops down, so to speak, in terms of detailing and drafting. But in 2006, when my son was 5 years old, is when we relocated to New York. I had been trying to relocate with the firm that I was with. They had an office in London, and I thought that London would be a really cool place to live with company. They were not very much in favor of relocating a family, so they kept putting it off and putting it off. And so Christmas the prior year, we came up here for a family vacation, and just for me, vacations are always kind of like working vacations when you're an architect, buildings, and you know, the internet was new and exciting, and you could read about different firms. So it peeked into the window of the Polshek partnership, and I thought, yeah, maybe I'll apply for a job here and just see how that goes. A former classmate had graduated from the University of Texas at Arlington. He came to New York about 5 years before I did. And I talked to him, hey, who did you work with, at Polshek's office? And he said, Susie Rodriguez. And so I wrote her a letter and sent her my academic portfolio. And the human resources person called me and invited me in for an interview. And I booked a flight and a hotel room and interviewed. And I went on 3 interviews total over the course of 2 trips to New York. And eventually they called me back and they offered me a job. And I was a little intimidated by that, actually. During the interview, they said, hey, if we offer you a job, how soon can you be here? I'm like, well, 4 weeks. And he called me back about a month later and offered the job. And I was a little nervous. I was like, can I have 6 weeks to get there? He said, you said 4. He reminded me, you said 4 weeks during the interview.
And then you had a week.
I'll do it. I'll be there, So we went in, my wife and I were working for the same firm at the time in Dallas. And we gave notice, 2 weeks notice. And we found on Craigslist a summer sublease. And so we landed in New York. And did that for the summer. And once you're on the ground here, you can connect with people and you can go look at apartments. And we found a rent stabilized apartment on the Upper West Side, and we've been there ever since.
Yeah, well, that's awesome. My favorite show takes place in New York, so I was like, that's so cool.
I'm sorry?
My favorite TV show takes place in New York. Like,
which one is that?
It's called Gossip Girl. And they're always talking about the Upper East Side and what's going on. I'm like, oh, it was so cool, like New York.
There are a lot of architectural typologies here for everyone of any interest. There's modern architecture, there's historic architecture, there's bad architecture. It's a real mashup, and people are very busy, so that means that there's a lot of opportunity.
Yeah, and, I would imagine in a big city like that.
For me, political ideology is important in the working environment that I seek and create. And I'm very sensitive to issues of race.
That's good.
My wife is also an architect, and we're sensitive to issues of gender equality in the workplace. And when you're in a large city, because everyone is so busy, that those issues are less
they're overlooked,
less influential in the decisions of principals. Not to say that the industry is predominantly a white male industry, and there are challenges for people of varying cultural, racial, gender backgrounds.
Okay. Well, that's really interesting. I've never heard anyone bring that up before, like ever. So that's really interesting, and I give you kudos for doing that. There's multiple people who just will say, "Well, that's how it is," and that's interesting. So, well, thank you. I guess my next question, because I did take a look at your website and I saw the restoration process you have, and I'm not too sure what that entails, but I was going to ask you, like, so in that case, what type of buildings there do you work on in New York, or is it only New York? Do you work on buildings from New York, but buildings that are not in New York? And I don't know if that made any sense. And which ones do you need?
Let's see. I settled into facade restoration. I really enjoyed working on the exterior of building envelope detailing. And when I was working in Dallas with HKS Architects, I worked on the W Hotel in Dallas, and fell into the team that was detailing the exterior. And so I started developing an understanding of how envelopes work, energy efficiency as it relates to modern buildings. And so I took the details that I had generated there, and when I applied to the Polshek office, again, I found myself doing the same thing with a different level of design and a heightened level of technical expertise, and it was quite rigorous. So I've worked on both modern buildings. My favorite project that I had with the Polshek office was an addition that we did to the Yale University Art Gallery. And I'll send you a follow-up email with links that you can post under the YouTube video that people can click on for different things that I've mentioned in regard to the different offices that I've worked. I'll put their web pages as well as any other literature that I might make reference to or those sort of things. When I was in undergraduate, maybe graduate school, I stumbled across a book at Half Price Books called The Care of Old Buildings by Donald Insall. And he's a preservationist that works out of the UK. And I was really moved by that. And it's like, wow, this is what I really want to do, you know. And at the back of the book, they had a list of different universities offering historic preservation degrees. Mm-hmm. And me, myself, I'm first generation college graduate, you know, and I looked at the list and it's like Columbia University, you know.
I know.
It was intimidating, and I didn't apply, and I couldn't even think of how I would pay for it, you know, and those sort of things. But those things that really strike a chord with you and resonate with you will be there through your whole life. And I continued working with the Polshek office in detailing modern buildings. And then the recession in 2008 impacted my family. My wife was laid off from her job, and I decided to ante up my male earning potential in the field of architecture and change jobs. So I navigated to a higher paying position with another office and worked in the office of Michael Fieldman and Perkins and Will. It was a collaborative project for the development of the New York Police Academy. And that saw me through the recession in 2008 because it was federally funded. The project was federally funded. Okay. And I picked up a few, you know, software proficiencies with Revit. I don't like Revit. I prefer AutoCAD. But, you learn a few things as you go along. After that, in 2010, I felt really burnt out. And I answered an advertisement in Craigslist. Craigslist is wonderful. Craigslist will change your life. Move to New York with Craigslist.
Write down Craigslist, everything.
I took a position with facade restoration engineering, and it's an engineering firm, not an architectural firm, but they do have architects on staff. And learned about forensic investigation. And this is where it starts to really tie into the archaeology interest that I had when I was a kid. And there's really a whole science and methodology for restoring buildings, and you begin to learn how things were constructed 50 years ago, 100 years ago, 150 years ago. And the industry has changed and methods have changed. But when you open up a building, it tells you the story. It's like it's a tablet in stone. It's an architectural or it's an archaeological investigation. The building will talk to you and reveal secrets. It's history. It'll let you in on its history. And there are different local codes. We have the International Building Code, which applies to the buildings, but there's a history of code in New York City. 1968 code is still valid, and 1938 code is still valid in some restoration projects. So there's a history of various codes that have come to have influence on construction in New York City, design and construction. There is a local law specifically that requires building owners to inspect their facades every 5 years, and the facade inspection is to be performed by a qualified exterior wall investigator, either an architect or an engineer. And it used to be 1 year of experience, and they've bumped it up to 7 because there have been incidences in the city where bricks and terracotta and stone have fallen and killed people. So that's the reason that the code exists. So my work at the moment is considered to be an essential work if I have an unsafe building. Yes. And that's helped keep us busy through the COVID pandemic as well.
Yeah, that's nice. Yeah, I was gonna ask you like if that had affected anything, but that's good. It hasn't.
COVID is still
but affected
your job through.
Yeah. Because I see here in El Paso, even when the real lockdown started for us, and I think it was March 10th, like construction that never ended. Like it never stopped. I always saw construction going on in different places. So I was gonna ask like if it had affected your job specifically.
Stopped. Projects that were regarded as non-essential were stopped, and the one building that I was working on that had an unsafe condition on the facade, that was considered essential, and we got authorization from the Department of Buildings to keep working. And but for the most part, non-essential would also be anything outside of the realm of healthcare, residential work, retail, new development. Some new developments went forward because they had an affordable housing component to it. One building that I'm working on in a small city north of New York City, New Rochelle, their project kept going because they had affordable housing. Affordable housing is also classified as essential. Mm-hmm. So there's a very limited amount of work that proceeded. So it has impacted the construction industry. And it's still continuing to play out because restaurants have not returned to full capacity, and retail is also very limited. A lot of people were laid off, and so when people have a hard time paying their rents, whether they're businesses or private individuals, that also has a ripple effect on the budget that building owners have to spend to undertake capital improvements. And that adjustment is still going to continue to play out for probably the next 6 months to a year. So it's a tenuous time. Yeah. In terms of keeping busy. Yeah. What I'm doing right now is I'm Zooming with other people and working on marketing strategies and how we can procure new clients and that sort of thing. Yeah. And, this conversation is it's great, you know. You have to stay connected, even when you can't meet with people in person. It's really important to stay connected and to reach out and to make new connections. I'm really happy that Manny came to me with this opportunity, and it's like, oh yeah, sure, I'll do it. Yeah,
thank you so much.
It's a great.
So another question. Because I found your website and it does say like your last name, so I assume this is now your firm. Like you have your own firm now. So I was gonna ask you, how did you get to this point? You know, I know it takes some time. When I didn't know much about architecture, I thought, like when I graduated high school, I was like, okay, I just get my architecture degree and like right away just start my own firm. And now I'm like quickly learning that that's probably not the best idea.
They don't stress business development in architecture, and it's a whole different category, a whole different discipline. The things you do for starting a business, and I learned it just by talking with other people who had started their own offices. And when I passed all my tests and I got my license, that was in 2010. So I worked for 10 years while I satisfied the IDP. I think I finished the IDP in about 6 years. Should take about 3 to 6.
Yeah.
I began testing, and it took about 3 or 4 years to finish all of the tests. I did have to retake a few of them. Not embarrassed to admit. That happens.
Yeah, it happens.
But just keep going. But in terms of starting a business, each state has different requirements for the type of business that you form. And mine is a professional limited liability corporation, PLLC, or company, I guess. There's different S corporation, C corporation, and I don't know a whole lot about the other options, but the PLLC worked well for me because it allowed me to work as a sole proprietor and use my social security number as the tax ID number. If you start an S corporation or a C corporation, you have a tax identification number for your company, and you would have to file taxes for the company in February, I believe is the deadline for the companies. So you send out all of your W-2s and your 1099s in January. Those are the deadlines for that. And then you file the taxes for your company in February. You would pay yourself as an employee and withhold tax withholdings on yourself as an employee. And then you file your personal taxes in April. So it's a little more complicated. The PLLC option was more streamlined and a better fit for my scenario. Mm-hmm. Let's see. We could probably have a whole discussion just on starting companies.
Like, to me, I'm not gonna lie, that's probably like the most scary aspect of this whole thing, is knowing that there's obviously a business side, and I don't know much about that yet. So
there is a risk side to that too, risk management in terms of any errors or omissions that you might make professionally. So you will have to carry an insurance policy as well. So you formulate a company, and that entity is insured to do a very prescribed type of service. For mine, it's exterior restoration. And that way, if anything goes wrong, anybody wants to sue you, the liability stops at your company, and it doesn't continue up the chain to your personal belongings, house, or any other investments that you may have. So I started the company in 2010 with some guidance from a friend of mine who had started a company previously. And I didn't take out any insurance policy until I had a client. And the client came to me word of mouth. It was a referral from a friend who is actually parents of one of my son's classmates in elementary school. He was a stage designer, and he moonlights or does side work as a carpenter. And he got into a situation with an apartment where it involved a structural component, and it needed to be filed with the Department of Buildings, the work type. So there's different cutoffs for what you can do as ordinary maintenance and what needs to be designed by either an architect or an engineer and filed with the Department of Buildings for a permit. And so there's a permit situation, and that was in 2012, about 2 years after I formed the company. And so I reached out at that time to other colleagues who were independently practicing and said, hey, where can I get some insurance? And they pointed me in a direction, and I took out an insurance policy, and the cost of that, I passed that on to the homeowner. She helped offset those fees. Yeah. And so anytime you're coming up, when you're negotiating services and it's personal, and people really want you to work on their building, you can ask for other things to help in addition to just a fee. You can ask for hey, will you help set up the insurance? Will you do this or that? And every little hurdle that comes along, there's always a way over it and around it. And just don't get discouraged. And if you don't know the answer to something, or you think the answer is no, talk around and connect with your community and start to like figure out like, what, why is this rule in effect, or why this, and once you understand the intent behind it, then you can address that and things will move forward.
Okay. Yeah. I do know like a lot of it is like following rules and codes, and that's what also gets me like, what if I don't see a code, or I don't know. That sounds scary, but I guess there's more to that than just not seeing it. But so my next question, because I'm looking at your website and I'm seeing like, multiple pictures you have up here. Which one is your favorite restoration?
My favorite is the West Beth Artist Housing. It's a really interesting building.
Oh yeah, I was looking at that just as you said.
It's a landmark building here in New York City. It's also on the National Register of Historic Places. It was the pilot building for Bell Labs, and there was some work related to the Oppenheimer project that went on there too. And it's got a very rich history. In 1970, it was converted from an industrial building to multi-residence, and the multifamily residence, there's a trust set up with specific rules that have to be satisfied, and one of those rules is that it housed artists. So it's a low rent or managed, stabilized rent multifamily building specifically for practicing artists, and it's been a real joy to work on that building.
Yeah.
And it was initially construction began in 1892, and there were a variety of additions that went on and happened over until about 1925. And each portion of the building has a slightly different construction typology to it, and it's a fascinating building to get to know.
Yeah, I mean, I would imagine knowing. I mean, I do know Texas has history. Obviously, there are old buildings. I think in my city there are not nearly as many as there could possibly be in New York. Like old buildings that have been there for over centuries. So that's pretty cool that you get to work on that. Okay, so my last question for you is, what I find myself having trouble with sometimes is feeling creative enough, or that what I would want to come up with, even though I'm nowhere like near like graduated, I haven't even had a job yet. I still find myself asking like, am I creative enough? Do I know what I'm doing? If there's any advice you'd have for someone who does feel like that, or is debating on if this is what they should do.
In terms of creativity, let your curiosity wander outside of the realm or umbrella of architecture. And I don't know what personal hobbies or interests that you have, but you can.
I consider myself artistic. I mean, I always am making something. I'm always like painting something or somewhat something like that. But I still find myself kind of like, I don't know if I know what I'm doing, or if I can see what I want to make, stuff like that.
And also connect with other people that feel the same way, and like we're doing now through Zoom, and you'll have some exposure to other avenues when you feel like you need something, whether it's another source of inspiration or stimulation. There's a calling there, and it's a little nut that needs to be cracked, or a puzzle to unravel. And connection with other creatives is really going to help move you through that sort of stuckness that you might feel, or another one is that relative to the COVID pandemic, there's, it's a stressful time to be in, and that also takes a toll. You may feel somewhat isolated, and connection is really a very important thing. Connecting with other creatives, and rest. Probably don't get enough of that, but having downtime and to enjoy a walk outside and take in some nature and just decompress a little bit, and just allow yourself some decompression time too. It's if you don't caution against pushing towards something all the time, because if you're really pushing and something's not breaking loose, then there's probably a different avenue or a different road that needs to be explored. Resistance is an indication that that there's a less resistive path. Yeah.
Alrighty. Okay, well, thank you so much for allowing me to interview today and have this conversation. Hope you enjoyed it.
Yeah, this has been great.